She smiled at me, a spark in her eyes, and whispered, "You have no idea what you're in for." And suddenly, nothing in my life would ever feel the same. It was one of those quiet afternoons where the world felt paused, the kind of stillness that makes you notice the little things. The faint scent of coffee in the air, the soft rustle of pages turning, the distant hum of conversation. I had wandered into that small, tucked-away bookstore more out of habit than intent, seeking something to fill the silence. And then I saw her. She was standing near the poetry section, effortlessly poised, scanning a row of books with a calm, deliberate motion. There was a subtle grace in the way she moved, the kind of fluidity that comes from confidence and a lifetime of experience. I don't think I've ever noticed someone so immediately, not just visually, but in a way that seems to quietly claim your attention. Her hair was dark, glossy, tucked neatly behind one ear, revealing the gentle curve of her jaw and the faintest hint of a smile playing at the corners of her lips. She was older than me. I could tell from the elegant composure and the quiet authority she carried. Yet there was a softness, almost a vulnerability, that made her approachable. Something about her made me pause, like the world had slowed down just enough to make space for her presence. When our eyes met, a brief, accidental glance, I felt a jolt, a sudden awareness of the heat in my own chest. She smiled, not a casual, fleeting smile, but one that held understanding and mischief at the same time. And then she said it. Her voice was low, smooth, and slightly teasing. "You have no idea what you're in for." The words hung in the air, light but electric, and I could feel the subtle pull of curiosity wrapping around me. I wanted to ask what she meant, wanted to step closer, but something restrained me. Respect, hesitation, the unspoken weight of the age difference. And yet, I couldn't look away. I noticed the small things. The way her fingers lingered on the spine of a book, as if considering its weight in her hand. The quiet tilt of her head, the way her eyes flickered with thought before returning to me. The faint perfume she wore, something soft, floral, impossibly warm, that clung to the air around her and somehow made the mundane bookstore feel intimate, private. For a moment, we were suspended in a silent exchange, an unspoken acknowledgement that there was more beneath the surface than either of us dared to speak. I wanted to reach out, even in some tiny way, to bridge the space between us. Yet the moment was fleeting. She turned, glancing back once, and then disappeared between the shelves. And there I stood, heart racing, aware that something subtle but profound had shifted. That single encounter, her smile, her words, the gentle warmth of her presence, left me unmoored, eager, and undeniably curious. I had no idea what I was stepping into, and somehow, that uncertainty felt intoxicating. That was the beginning, a quiet spark in the hum of ordinary life. And from that moment, I knew I wouldn't be able to stop thinking about her. The woman who smiled, then whispered, "You have no idea what you're in for." After that first encounter, I couldn't stop thinking about her. It wasn't just the memory of her smile or the way her words had lingered in the air. It was the way she had made the world feel suddenly sharper, more vivid. Every small sound, every flicker of light seemed to carry meaning I hadn't noticed before. I found myself walking past the bookstore several times that week, half hoping to see her again, half dreading that I might not. And then one rainy afternoon I did. She was at a nearby café, sitting alone by the window, a book open before her and a cup of coffee steaming gently in her hands. The soft patter of rain against the glass made the room feel intimate, and somehow, she seemed even more radiant in that quiet cocoon. I hesitated at the entrance, unsure if I should approach or simply let this moment linger in my memory. But she looked up and our eyes met. That subtle spark returned, the one that made my chest tighten with anticipation. She didn't rush toward me, didn't even gesture for me to come over, yet I felt drawn in as if some invisible thread had pulled me to her side. When I finally sat down across from her, the air between us was charged with a quiet curiosity. We didn't need words at first. The gentle brush of her hand as she adjusted her coffee cup, the soft, almost imperceptible shift of her body toward me. Every small gesture seemed intentional, yet effortless. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, her voice low, calm, and teasing all at once. The warmth in her tone made me acutely aware of my own nervousness, the quickening of my pulse, the subtle flush creeping up my neck. There was a magnetic pull in her gaze, the kind that made you feel simultaneously exposed and protected. As we spoke, the conversation flowed in unexpected directions, from trivial observations about the rain to deeper musings about books, life, and fleeting moments of connection. She laughed softly at my attempts at humor, and for a moment, it felt as though the space around us had contracted, leaving only the two of us in a world where time had slowed. I noticed every detail. The way her fingers lingered over the rim of her cup, the faint scent of her perfume that mingled with the rich aroma of coffee, the tilt of her head that seemed to invite me to understand her without words. Each small touch, each glance carried weight, and I felt an undeniable pull, a combination of admiration, intrigue, and something more intimate I couldn't quite name. Yet beneath the fascination was a quiet unease. I was painfully aware of the age gap, of the social expectations that whispered caution, of my own hesitations. Still, every instinct in me urged me closer, to linger, to listen, to be near her in a way that felt both forbidden and entirely natural. When I finally left the café, I carried her presence with me like a secret warmth against my chest. I replayed our interaction over and over, noticing things I had missed the first time. The subtle curve of her smile when she was amused, the way her eyes softened when she spoke of something meaningful, the brush of her hand that lingered a moment too long. By the time I walked home, I realized something had shifted. Curiosity had grown into longing, hesitation had mingled with desire, and the pull she exerted over me was no longer subtle. It was impossible to ignore. I didn't know yet what I was stepping into, but I knew I was already in too deep to turn back. Our meetings became more frequent, though never forced. Each encounter carried a quiet electricity, the kind that made ordinary moments feel unexpectedly intimate. One evening, I found myself walking beside her through a small city park, the sun setting low, spilling golden light across the cobblestone path. She moved with that same effortless grace, yet there was a contemplative air about her that I hadn't noticed before. We spoke little at first, letting the soft rhythm of our steps and the occasional rustle of leaves fill the space between us. Then she began to share, a story about her life, not a grand revelation, but small confessions that hinted at her inner world. She spoke of regrets and joys, of choices she had made and moments she had wished she could relive. I listened, captivated not just by her words, but by the quiet trust embedded in them. As she spoke, she glanced at me briefly, gauging my reaction. I noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders ease as she realized I wasn't judging, only listening. There was something profoundly moving about her willingness to reveal herself, even in these small, tentative ways. And I, in turn, found myself opening up, sharing thoughts I rarely voiced aloud, admitting fears I normally kept locked away. We stopped at a bench beneath a large oak, its branches stretching like protective arms overhead. She leaned slightly toward me, her hand brushing against mine as she adjusted her position. The contact was fleeting, almost accidental, yet the warmth that spread through me was undeniable. I felt the weight of her presence, the steady pulse of her energy, and a quiet sense of safety. Her laughter came softly at one of my confessions, and it sounded like sunlight spilling through the trees. In that moment, I realized how much I was drawn not just to her appearance or charm, but to the depth she carried beneath the surface. There was a strength tempered by vulnerability, a grace tempered by hesitation, and it fascinated me. When she paused, her eyes met mine with an intensity that made my chest tighten. It wasn't desire alone, it was recognition, an acknowledgement that our connection was unusual, complicated, but undeniably real. I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and caution, the age gap and the unspoken boundaries making every gesture, every glance more charged. As we rose to leave, she gave my arm a brief, almost imperceptible squeeze. The gesture was small, yet it spoke volumes, of trust, comfort, and the fragile beginnings of emotional intimacy. I noticed the lingering warmth in my hand long after we parted, the echo of her presence following me home. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the walk over and over. Every detail, the weight of her gaze, the subtle brush of her hand, the sound of her laughter, stayed vivid in my mind. I realized that the pull I felt toward her was no longer simple curiosity or fleeting attraction. It was something deeper, more profound, a desire to understand her completely, to be present in her world, and to allow her presence to quietly transform my own. This was no longer a chance encounter. It was a connection, delicate but real, hinting at the possibility of something neither of us fully understood. Yet both of us were beginning to crave. By now, our encounters had taken on a rhythm of their own. Each meeting felt deliberate yet effortless, a dance of subtle signals and unspoken emotions. I found myself constantly aware of her presence, even when she wasn't near. There was a gravity to her that made ordinary interactions feel significant, and the space between us seemed charged with possibilities we neither fully acknowledged nor dared to explore. One afternoon, we were tasked with organizing a small community event, a project that forced us into close proximity for hours. I noticed how her hand would occasionally brush against mine when passing materials, a fleeting contact that made my pulse jump. Every accidental touch felt deliberate, and yet she carried it with such casual grace that I wasn't sure if she intended the effect. We worked in silence for stretches, punctuated by soft conversation. Her laughter was a gentle melody, rising over the hum of activity, and it pulled me in like gravity. There were moments when our eyes met across the room, lingering longer than they should, conveying unspoken understanding, curiosity, and desire. But each time, either one of us would look away, a mixture of hesitation and respect keeping the tension from spilling over. The push and pull became more pronounced when we stepped outside for a break. Standing side by side, the sun warming our shoulders, we shared fragments of personal stories. Nothing too heavy, but enough to draw us closer. I felt the subtle heat of her arm near mine, the brush of her hair against my sleeve as she leaned slightly to reach for her cup of tea. Every detail became amplified. The scent of her perfume, the softness of her scarf, the warmth of her presence so close to me. And yet, for every step forward, there was a retreat. She would occasionally glance at me with a teasing smirk, as if testing the waters, only to pull back with a light laugh that kept me guessing. I, too, found myself hesitating, aware of the age difference, of the social implications, of the fragile boundaries we were skirting. Each interaction was a careful balance between desire and restraint, a dance of restraint and unspoken longing. Later, as we cleaned up together, a shared silence enveloped us. I noticed the way she moved around me, subtly attuned to my presence, her gestures light and deliberate. When our hands brushed again over a stack of papers, I felt a shiver of awareness, a spark that made the ordinary task feel intimate, almost electric. By the end of the day, my mind was a tangle of emotions, excitement, admiration, hesitation, and longing. The tension between us had grown heavier, yet the restraint, the subtlety, made every interaction more potent. I realized that this slow-burning attraction was more than physical. It was emotional, cerebral, and profoundly affecting. Walking home that evening, I replayed our day over and over. Every glance, every touch, every small smile lingered in my mind, a reminder that the connection between us was no longer subtle. It was real, palpable, and impossible to ignore. The pull she exerted over me was undeniable, a mixture of fascination, longing, and the quiet ache of restrained desire. For the first time, I felt the tension not as discomfort, but as a promise, a subtle warning that what we shared could grow into something deeper, something neither of us had yet dared to name. And somehow I wanted it to. The days that followed our shared project were filled with a restless kind of anticipation. Every time I saw her, I felt the magnetic pull stronger, an unspoken urgency beneath the calm surface of our conversations. It wasn't just attraction anymore. It was a deeper yearning, a need to be understood, to be close, and to let her know that I noticed every detail. Every glance, every gesture, every fleeting smile. One evening, she invited me to her apartment under the pretense of helping her arrange a few things for an upcoming trip. It was casual, but the intimacy of entering her personal space, the soft lighting, the quiet music, the scent of lavender lingering in the air, made my chest tighten with a nervous excitement. I was hyper-aware of every movement, every subtle shift in the space between us. We moved around the room together, passing books and objects, our hands brushing occasionally. Each touch, fleeting and gentle, felt electric, a silent confession in itself. When our fingers lingered for a fraction longer than necessary, I could sense her awareness, the shared understanding that we were both tiptoeing along the edge of something forbidden yet profoundly compelling. Finally, as we paused to catch our breath, I found myself speaking before I could stop myself. I think about you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, betraying the intensity one tried to mask. More than I probably should. Every time I see you, I trailed off, unsure how to articulate the mix of admiration, fascination, and longing I felt. She looked at me then, really looked, her eyes softening with a mix of surprise and recognition. A quiet smile played on her lips, and she reached out, letting her hand rest lightly on mine. The warmth of her touch was grounding, yet it sent a thrill through me that I couldn't ignore. I know, she murmured, her voice low and gentle. I feel it too. There was a pause, charged with unspoken emotion. I could feel the subtle tension in her body, the slight quickening of her breath, the way her eyes searched mine for reassurance. I wanted to close the distance, to let the moment stretch into something neither of us would forget, but I also wanted to honor the fragile boundary we had maintained for so long. She leaned in slightly, her hand brushing my arm again, more deliberately this time. The gesture was intimate, yet entirely safe, a quiet acknowledgement of the connection we shared, the emotional bridge we had built over days of subtle glances, laughter, and shared vulnerability. I felt a profound sense of closeness, as if we had crossed an invisible barrier without words, without urgency, yet with complete understanding. For a long moment, we simply existed together, the silence filled with warmth, trust, and mutual recognition. It was in that gentle touch, that lingering gaze, that I realized how deeply I cared for her. Not just for her beauty or her charm, but for the depth she carried, the quiet strength behind her smile, and the way she made me feel seen. When I left that night, my heart was full, my mind alive with possibilities. We had crossed the invisible barrier, a threshold into emotional intimacy that neither of us had dared to name before. And in that crossing, I knew that what we shared was no longer tentative curiosity. It was the beginning of something profoundly real, quietly intoxicating, and utterly transformative. The following days felt different. Every interaction carried a quiet intensity, an unspoken acknowledgement of what had begun between us. There was no need for grand gestures or declarations. Even the simplest exchanges hummed with meaning. Our connection had deepened, the subtle glances, fleeting touches, and shared laughter layering into a tapestry of intimacy I had never experienced before. One evening, she invited me to join her for a walk along the riverside, a gentle, golden light casting long shadows across the cobblestones. The air was crisp, tinged with the faint scent of autumn leaves, and the world around us seemed to quiet itself in anticipation, as if the universe knew this moment mattered. We walked side by side, the space between us charged yet comfortable, our steps falling into an unspoken rhythm. We stopped at a small wooden bench overlooking the river. She sat first, and I followed, careful not to crowd her, yet drawn to her presence in a way I couldn't resist. The quiet of the evening enveloped us, punctuated only by the gentle lapping of water against the riverbank. I could feel her shoulder lightly brushing mine, her hand occasionally grazing mine as we adjusted our positions. Every touch, though small, carried a weight of meaning, reassurance, trust, and the faint stirrings of desire. Finally, I broke the silence. "I've been thinking about us," I said softly, my voice carrying the vulnerability I had struggled to conceal. She turned toward me, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight, a mixture of anticipation and tenderness in her gaze. "I don't want to rush anything," I continued, "but I can't ignore how I feel, how drawn I am to you." Her hand found mine, this time intentionally, her fingers curling gently around mine. "I feel it too," she said, her voice steady, warm, and full of quiet certainty. "And I've been waiting for this moment, for us to acknowledge it fully." The sincerity in her words wrapped around me, grounding me while simultaneously sending a thrill through every fiber of my being. We sat there in companionable silence, our hands entwined, leaning slightly toward each other. The world felt distant, irrelevant, as if everything outside this moment had faded. I noticed the subtle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, the warmth radiating from her hand, the soft brush of her hair against my arm. Every detail was amplified by the quiet intensity of our connection, a sensory reminder of the intimacy we had cultivated. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we shared a gentle, lingering touch, a cheek brushed against mine, a brief, reassuring squeeze of the hand. There was no need for more. The moment was complete in its quiet honesty, its slow, deliberate acknowledgement of our feelings. We had crossed a threshold, embracing the attraction, admiration, and emotional closeness that had grown between us. Walking back, our fingers intertwined, I realized the tension and hesitation that had once defined our interactions had transformed into a comforting certainty. We understood each other, respected each other, and most importantly, accepted the bond that had grown between us. The invisible barriers of age, expectation, and uncertainty had softened, leaving a profound sense of harmony, trust, and anticipation for what was to come. For the first time, I felt fully present in the connection, not just drawn to her, but grounded in the knowledge that we had navigated the delicate balance of desire and respect, reaching a place where our hearts could quietly, confidently align. After that evening by the river, Everything between us shifted, though in subtle, unspoken ways. The pull, once electric and tentative, had settled into a quiet, steady rhythm, a presence that was as comforting as it was exhilarating. We didn't need grand gestures to affirm what had begun. Every shared glance, every brush of hands, every small laugh carried the weight of understanding, trust, and affection. One weekend, she invited me to a small gathering at her apartment. Nothing formal, just a casual meeting with a few friends. The atmosphere was relaxed, warm, filled with the soft hum of conversation and the faint scent of her lavender perfume lingering in the air. As I entered, I noticed her smile, radiant yet unguarded, and I felt a sense of ease and belonging that I hadn't realized I'd been craving. We spent much of the evening in quiet moments together amidst the chatter, sitting side by side on the couch, our shoulders brushing, hands occasionally finding each other's. The world outside seemed to blur, leaving only the shared space of trust, laughter, and subtle intimacy. Every glance she gave me, every small gesture, was a reminder of the bond we had nurtured, a bond built on patience, honesty, and quiet courage. Later, as the evening wound down, we stepped out onto her balcony. The city lights sparkled below, and the night air was crisp and soothing. She leaned slightly against me as we watched, her head resting just above my shoulder. Her hand found mine, fingers intertwining naturally, and I felt the warmth of her touch seep into me like a gentle reassurance. We didn't speak for a long time. There was no need. The silence was comfortable, full of shared understanding and the soft certainty of belonging. If there were doubts or fears before, they had softened into trust. The age difference, once a subtle barrier in my mind, had become just another layer of her depth, an aspect of the woman I admired and loved for the entirety of who she was. And I could see in her eyes the same recognition, that this connection, tender and deliberate, was worth embracing fully. As we stepped back inside, she gave me a gentle squeeze on the arm, a small kiss on the cheek, and a look that said more than words ever could. It was quiet, respectful, and intimate, the perfect culmination of a journey that had begun with a single enigmatic smile. In that gesture, I felt the depth of her affection, the steadiness of her trust, and the warmth of the bond we had created together. Later that night, as I walked home, I realized how much we had both grown through the slow, deliberate unfolding of our relationship. Every step, every touch, every conversation had brought us to a place of harmony, a connection that was as emotionally profound as it was comforting. And in that realization, I understood that love didn't always need to rush. Sometimes it was in the patient, quiet moments that it became most real. For the first time, I felt completely at ease in her presence. No hesitation, no uncertainty, only the quiet joy of being with someone who truly saw me as I saw her. And I knew that whatever came next, we had built a foundation strong enough to carry us forward, together, in harmony, and ready to face the world side by side.